Supreme Court today decided to uphold a federal gun control law that's meant to protect victims of domestic violence.
Now, the law prevents people with a domestic violence restraining order from having a gun.
This is a huge relief for women, for kids in this country. It's a big win for common sense gun safety. And the vast majority of Americans across party lines agree wholeheartedly.
The justices reversed a ruling from the federal appeals court in New Orleans that had struck down the law. The case started when a Texas man was accused of hitting his girlfriend during an argument in a parking lot and later threatening to shoot her.
The man, later sentenced to prison, filed a lawsuit arguing that the federal law stripping his gun rights was a violation of the Second Amendment. Now, this is the High Court's first Second Amendment case since they expanded gun rights in 2022.
And today, local victim advocates are echoing that sigh of relief and what it means for Utah laws that protect domestic violence victims.
News specialist Brian Carlson shares how emotions over the case were running high.
This is a big ruling that solidifies how the U.S. Supreme Court sees how guns apply to these domestic violence cases. Up until today, many were wondering how the court would rule. Well, now we have the answer. Today, the U.S. Supreme Court gave advocates for domestic violence victims a decisive victory.
We are very relieved.
Utah Domestic Violence Coalition Executive Director Jennifer Campbell says it's a win she didn't necessarily expect.
Often in this work, I don't think we get to take a lot of breaths and say, this is something that we're being seen and being heard. And I hope that individuals impacted by violence feel seen and heard in this moment.
By the court ruling to uphold a federal gun ban on people with domestic violence protective orders, the justices prioritize victim safety over the changing of the interpretation of the Second Amendment. It doesn't change Utah law, which already lined up with the ban, but our KSL legal expert Greg Skorda says it's likely to make some Utah gun owners upset.
I believe that some Utahns, including some members of the legislature, would say you can't just take somebody's Second Amendment rights away. But the Supreme Court of the United States today said, yes, you can.
Skorda says the law is limited to cases of domestic violence protective orders. But victim advocates hope it's not the only legal step given to protect victims going forward. According to a 2020 report looking at the Utah intimate partner and domestic violence fatalities, domestic violence deaths made up 22% of all Utah homicides. It's hard to say how many times guns were used in those deaths.
One of the weaknesses we have is our data collection and looking at how guns are used.
So today's ruling helps Utah keep the standard, but a standard victims still hope can change in the future. Now, prior to today, KSL had heard rumblings some in the state legislature were toying with the idea of changing gun laws for domestic violence cases. This ruling now makes that harder to change. At the state capitol, Brian Carlson, KSL 5 News.